My name is Matthew Hunter, Landscape Plant Establishment, and this is the Module 2 project. So we are out here again at the local tree farm that I'm working at, and we're going to be talking about soil modification, fertilizer, mulching, planting techniques, establishment in the urban landscape, and in a commercial production setting like this. And what we're looking at here is actually a dead sky climber live oak tree that died after its roots were cut extremely hard because of the lack of root pruning in its younger age, and we were trying to prepare it for this year's dig, so we came through and actually root pruned our live oaks that are tagged to get dug this year about 3 weeks ago. That way when they get dug, hopefully, well, they're going to get dug about 3.5 weeks from now, whenever we get a decent long cold snap when these oaks get into dormancy. So it's just this establishment part of, in its younger life, of promoting root growth and not having these very large roots that are about 1.5 inches in diameter. So about 4 of these were cut really hard, and this tree, just for whatever reason, didn't have the particular root system that these other ones have. Only one of these actually died, so it's a pretty good rate for only being root pruned about, I think, once in their lifetime. Preferably you get about 2 or 3 good root prunings on there. That way your death rate at digging won't be as high. These trees are in actually a very good soil. It's pretty sandy. It's clay about 18 inches down, and promotes a lot of good drainage and doesn't hold water very well. And the pH is actually right around where it needs to be, about 6.0 for these oak trees. And obviously this is in an urban landscape, and these trees are planted close together, and these rows will get compacted pretty easily with all the machinery that gets run back through it, but not as bad as it would in an urban landscape where you've got roads and people walking a lot and all of different machinery and things that go on there. So around this area here where the grass and the dirt kind of meet, you're not going to get that high compaction level where the roots aren't going to grow over here and they're kind of going to turn and grow back up in this dirt here. So especially with a live oak as vigorous as these roots are as from the get-go, you're not going to have that soil compaction problems at all. Over here we've got some smaller live oaks that were planted. They did everything kind of sporadically up here, so you've got bigger trees and smaller material planted together. And the problems with the planting techniques that they had from the get-go was the fact that they planted extremely too deep too first, and they didn't shave the root ball at all, so you're not going to have any good generation of roots coming up, promoting good root growth. This oak's actually not too bad compared to the other stuff around here, but this tree's actually been planted here for at least a year, and it really hasn't done anything at all. No staking, no metal rod staking from the get-go to keep it extremely straight, which in a commercial setting, everything's got to be extremely straight. So as something like this isn't staked at all, it can turn into a 4-inch live oak that is leaning pretty bad compared to this, because it was just all kind of naturally free growing. Now the tree still looks good, but when you're trying to sell that, you've got to, that's got to be corrected when it's planted in the landscape, lean back over. So most of the time that's a problem that most landscaper contractors don't want to deal with at all. They're just going to buy straight material. Plus straight material also turns into central dominant leaders. So if you don't have that, then you can lose your head on your trees pretty easily. So that planting technique, they didn't shave the root ball at all or slice. They just stuck it in and rake back over it. So they didn't really maintain that very well. The fertilizer rates were actually kind of wrong on these as well. The main thing was the timing of the fertilizer on these younger trees. They didn't do it at the correct timing to really, during shoot development and root development where the tree is growing actively too hard. It was kind of late in the season where they didn't get that 100% growth out of it. So I think they put on, I believe it was a pound of fertilizer, about a little less than a pound of fertilizer for these younger material trees. So we're going to correct that problem here by getting fertilizer on these oak trees and staked up before, preferably March, mid-March, where the cold really stops happening, and we can get the first flush hit real well, and they'll be ready to go for when it gets warm. Here we are, kind of another spot in the field here where this is another oak that was root pruned, but it was cut real hard just like everything else, and it wasn't established enough to where we had to come back through and stake it back up to keep it up straight, and that way it wouldn't die on us, and hopefully it'll stay good for us. But this is something this is a problem you'll face in a commercial setting like this sometimes. Hopefully not too many of them, but every once in a while you have to come back through and do a staking thing like this. There's a lot of different staking techniques that you can use, whether it's T-post with mule tape or something, a tripod kind of staking system like this. When the tree is very big, you can't just put a little small metal stake on it. So this is something we'll come back through, and it's something that you'll see whenever it gets planted in a landscape after it leaves a farm like this. They'll usually do something along these lines of keeping it straight at least for a year. That way it kind of gets established in there. But yeah, this is just a problem that we had to come through and fix. And one thing we did do once we root pruned was you can see right there, we have the black emitter. That emitter puts out 15 gallons of water per hour, and I believe right now it was up to, it's getting about I think 8.5 gallons right now per day. We upped the watering on it since it was root pruned and cut hard, and then once this tree gets dug and into a basket, burlap, and liner, the water will be upped on it as well, especially as we get into the warm season. They'll be getting watered somewhere probably around 15 to 20 gallons a day, at least for the first month and a half or so, to that hardening off stage, to really make sure that they're soaked plenty enough to so they won't die and dry out on us. There's one good thing about these oaks, the fact that they go so dormant compared to some other trees, that until it gets warm back in the season again, you're not gonna have too lot of issues with them. So they won't need as much water as some other things will to stay established. All right, we come over here to our summer red maple patch, and just a few things are in here that can hinder establishment. Is the fact that they took these empty holes throughout this patch here, and they planted, like here, this really small magnolia tree. Now right now that's not a huge issue, posing an issue right now, but we do have some large trees around it that if they stay there, they could just slow down growth and imbalance the canopy on the head, and different issues that can come into play with keeping this tree maybe not established too well, but just an aesthetic appeal of the way you want your tree to look when it's done. Obviously right now it's not staked as well. This tree was planted too deep, just like the other stuff that we talked about in here. I mean, that's already an inch of soil, 2 inches of soil, 3 inches of soil before I get to any roots. And as you can see, they've already started to come off they started to come off here on the top instead of going back down like they used to. So because the trunk was planted too down, they started latent buds shooting off the trunk there. So they want to get this staked. They want to get this staked, and as a commercial producer, you get it staked right here for the central leader, but you would come back through and you just pop here, pop here, pop there, and reduce these competing laterals for the central leader in these mag trees, and then you keep that going, and then once it starts, buds and stuff start shooting off here, you can start pruning it the way the way that you want to do it. So that's just another issue you have through here. So establishment, not so much when it comes to the placement planning, it's just to where it's going to be, and how it can affect the way it looks later on. But obviously those issues there are going to help or hinder establishment. But one thing I wanted to show you in here was just the operational procedures of, this is kind of the final stage of everything. We have a mag here that we dug, and we upped the timing on the watering on them as well, but as you can see, we added some spitters here, or some emitters here, so we've got 3 on here right now. I guess some stuff come through and knock these off. But this is the final stage, pretty much, and this is where the cultural differences come into play with how different farms do stuff. Some farms use seatbelt strap instead of rope. This is more expensive to use, but it is twice as strong in my opinion. Um, just the way that the burlap is nailed in here. This is the way that I was showing everybody, showing them how to do it. It looks real good. It helps. This without the strap also helps with this tree blowing over back and forth, because you want everything as tight as you can get it to keep it from rolling over or blowing over at all. And that ultimately starts with the nailing of the burlap, to the tying of the star, to the twisting of the top rings down in here, to the twisting of the ears right here. So it's all like a continuous process of working your way to twisting the ears and get everything tight. And obviously with this polyliner here is going to be put on it, and that really just is another layer for roots to grow through before it gets into the ground again. So if this tree is going to have to sit here for a year before it gets sold, it won't be as hard to get out of the ground. So I mean, normally you'll have crops rotating, and you'll have trees that'll sit here for a year before they get sold, and obviously you don't want them to get too big in the size root ball that they're in. This maple here is right at 3 inches, and it's dug in a 40-inch diameter root ball, which is appropriate for it. But if it's out here for 2 years and established back into the soil, and grew up to like 4.5, 5, and you've got large old material in small baskets that don't have the appropriate root system for the size they're in, when they get transferred over to the urban landscape, they might not do as well. And it's pretty much it's a main thing of just, I guess, the courtesy of what tree farms sell to the public, that get put out, and the way the economy's now been. That's why a lot of material hasn't been as good quality, because it's been a lot older and cheaper to buy, the stuff nowadays. So hopefully we'll get back to, like, the better material and stuff like that. But yeah, the water is raised up on here, and this tree, it depends on the variety. We have our ollie elms, which are actually over here. Our ollie elms over there, and then we got some over there, and then down that direction over there we got some red cedars. So those are, at least this point, the end of fall, are kind of dig on the command. We can start digging a little earlier before it gets cold. They're pretty good at it. Red cedars can actually be dug pretty much around year, so you won't, if you don't have to as many dug and you need to dig some more, you can dig some other ones. But these got dug a little bit earlier. These actually got sold, so they're going through about a month hardening off stage before we really know, make sure they're not going to die, and we get roots back through. On some, depending on how good the root system is, on some live oaks, some other things, we can actually start to get, you'll see little root hairs start to shoot, back through this burlap anywhere from about 3 weeks. So once we see that, everything's pretty good, and it depends on just the way the tree farm runs their operations, where, if they 100% sure like to make sure that they have roots coming through their burlap, before it gets sold. So some tree farms are part of a roots plus grower society, where everything is hardened off for at least 3 months, and they need to have we have roots coming through the burlap to really show that the tree's not going to die. And other farms don't really run by that sometimes. So it just depends on just their cultural practices of how they operate. I just wanted to real quick show you um, another reason why root pruning in the commercial production farm is extremely important. These are some bluff oaks that were dug actually about 2 weeks ago, and we've had a lot of them, every single one of them shocked, and we've lost 4 or 5 of them, because down here they weren't lateral, didn't have a lot of root growth, and they had tap roots coming out the bottom of the thing here at least 4 to 5 feet, and they were an inch and a half in diameter, so they had to be cut, obviously, to be put back in the hole. And that was just a massive shock on these trees, and we lost a few of them. Hopefully won't lose all of them at all. So they might have been dug a little bit early. They're kind of a tree that you're kind of a borderline where you really have to wait for them to get cold or not, but You know, we risked it a little bit. We had a sale on them, so we dug some for them, and hopefully, you know, we didn't lose a lot of them. So we are losing some of them a little bit, about 5 or 6 right now. So hopefully, we won't have any more losses on these. But that's just another look of the root ball as it's out of the ground. Actually, from what I showed you before, it's just three-sided, and this actually does have ropes on it. It looks like they had a little bit of an issue getting it out of the hole because it's bent right here. Um, but when they would come through, they would just come through with a strap, and they'd hook it up through here through a machine, and they'd pick it up through these ropes here and carry it around instead of up in the canopy um, or which you see a lot actually. What a lot contractors do, they just take a strap and they'll just wrap it around the trunk here, which is pretty bad because that can just skin your tree. It's very easy to skin your tree like this, especially on soft bark trees like a magnolia. They do sometimes, and when they're planting it, at a super center or whatever, and then they set it there and it's all skin up, and then that can sometimes come back on us thinking it was mishandled by us when it really wasn't. So um, just the proper way of carrying the tree, and depending on the tree and the size, we'll use either two or three of these. And then if we get into like actual very big root balls, it'll be seatbelt because it's a lot stronger, and it'll be at least 4 seatbelt straps. So it's just another look at it, and then talking about the root pruning, and that shot can translate into establishment if it's not completely hardened off at the farm, and then that tree will die and it'll have to come back on us to get replaced. Here we are up at the UF greenhouses, here, and we're going to be talking about the soil here that we use for the poinsettia crop that we have. The soils that we used this year is Pfeffer 2, and it's a mixture of 55% peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite, compared to what other researchers use and what we've used in the past, which is relatively similar soil, but it's just a little bit different, a little bit more organic matter. It's about 10% more peat, and then it does not contain vermiculite in it at all. So this is going to retain water a little bit more compared to the two that we use. So one thing that we like to use with our poinsettias are like a lot of aeration in there. Both of these soils have very high CECs and respond very well with fertilizer. And this will drain water a little bit easier, allowing it to dry out and not sit. And that helps with our root diseases and our algae and things like that. They are very close, but there's small differences, and depending on the cultural practices of some people, the way people grow, it can be somewhat of a difference in how the plants look. So that's one thing that we're working on. So with these two soils that we're comparing here, that we're talking about, this is cultural practice that can help help plant establishment and longevity for one. This Pfeffer 2 will help with longevity a little bit longer than this will. This hoards more water. They're both very good soils though, but applications are used a little bit different with seeds or propagative growing on bedding plants. So they're both awesome soils, and but the two that we've been working with this year has been real well with. It holds water for a decent amount of time, and depending on the plant size, how long, in between watering frequencies. But the fact that it leaches very well, and it's been helping with our EC levels and our salts. So, obviously we do have to leach and come back through with plain water, but this soil here is almost foolproof, to a certain degree, with plant establishment and longevity, and the fact that we have not really had to worry with any root diseases or anything like that at all, because of how good of soil it is, and the way that it's all mixed up. So the modifications of what we change with the soil can be a little different from year to year depending on who's going to be working with it. So it's just another practice used. What we're using here up at the greenhouses here for a fertilizer system, it's all injected through our water lines, and it fluctuates. It fluctuates from the 250 parts per million of 15515 to our 2010-20, and this here is at 250 parts per million, but that's what's getting applied through the water hose. This right here, tank, is actually stock solution of like 25,000 parts per million, because when the water comes through and the fertilizer comes through, it mixes a gallon of fertilizer per 100 gallons of water. So every single time that we apply fertilizer, fert water to these plants here, it comes in at a 250 parts per million. Now when these plants get, some of them will get set on a sub-irrigation table where the table floods, that doesn't leach very well, so that is actually cut in half, so that's 125 parts per million that are added on the sub-irrigation tables. But these fertilizer rates here really help promote root growth and establishment in these pots at a very, very quick stage, and we'll come through about once or twice a month, depending on how the frequency of watering that has to be done, and we'll leach with plain water and really get these pots full with plain water, and down at the bottom here have a bunch of water drain and push all those salts out there, because high salts high salts for a week or 2 weeks or so can really slow down vegetative growth, and that will limit the size that we're wanting to attain. So we really try and maintain our salt levels by leaching very well, and if we have big problems, we'll have other additives to help with the salts a little bit. But the fertilizer that we use works very well, and it's very, very convenient as well through this hose systems and the mixing of the stock solutions, and the same thing over here and all over the greenhouse.